Horae Apocalypticae, Volume 1, an historicist commentary on the Revelation, updated and revised for the 21st century, derived from the original work of E.B. Elliott. Read by yours truly, Nicholas Arthur. Part 1, Chapter 1, The First Seal. And what, then, was to be the characteristic state of the Roman Empire, according to the first seal's prefiguration, following after the time then present of the apostles' exile in Patmos? It might not unnaturally have been expected by Christians who, like him, were suffering from Domitian's persecution, that it would not be very long before, under the sentence of God's righteous judgment, the great persecuting empire of heathen Rome would be seen declining towards its dissolution, and truly the vices, follies, and oppressions of the emperor then reigning, just as of most that had preceded him, might suggest an internal cause then already in operation, and moreover the recent successful incursions of the frontier barbarians, an external one, each apparently almost sufficient of itself to produce that result. But such a result was not indicated to St. John. On the contrary, the first symbol under which the Roman people was represented, to his view, presented it somewhat strangely under the color of triumph, prosperity, and health in the body politic. I looked, and lo, a white horse, and he that sat thereon having a bow, and a crown was given him. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. Combining the chief indications here given, it was as if prosperity long unknown would spring up and continue for some considerable time within the empire, a prosperity introduced in some striking manner by wars of victory, and that would be still attended by victory whenever and wherever wars might arise afterwards, even to the end of the period prefigured, to which wars there would be a going forth under guidance answering to that of the crowned bow-bearing rider, thereby assuring the general inviolability from foreign foes, and perhaps advancing the limits and the greatness of the empire. Roman numeral 1. And first, did not this answer very notably and distinctively to the general state and history of the Roman Empire for the 80 or 90 years succeeding John's banishment, that is, from Domitian's death, A.D. 96, throughout the successive reigns of Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and the two Antonines, until the accession of Commodus, and triumphant peace made by him with the Germans, A.D. 180, or indeed, yet a year or two farther on, to the completion of his Germanic successes and coincident primary deterioration of his government about 183. I turn to Gibbon, whose history, by a singular coincidence, in respect of commencing date, as well as of subject, agrees with the apocalyptic prefiguration, and I find him, just as in this first seal's symbolic sketch, deferring for a while to enter on his great subject of the decline of the Roman Empire, in order, in the first place, to describe its glory and its happiness in this precise era, as being that which immediately preceded its decline. In fact, he makes it the bright ground, if I may say so, of his historic picture, whereon to trace out afterwards more effectively in dark coloring the successive traits of the empire's corruption and decline. He represents it, and his representations are well confirmed by the original histories remaining to us. He represents it as a golden age of prosperity, union, civil liberty, and good government, a period unstained with civil blood, like the white of the first apocalyptic horse, in contrast with the red of the second, and undisturbed by revolution, a period remarkable, both at its commencement and at its close, for very wonderful and almost uniform triumphs in war, whereby the glory of the empire was illustrated, and its limits extended, and of which the middle interval, though not without occasional wars on the frontiers, was generally a time of profound and happy peace. In short, he thus sums up his view of it, quote, "If a man were called to fix the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would without hesitation name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus." I said that the wars of the Romans during this period were all but uniformly triumphant, and it may be well briefly to particularize on this point, not to rest then on Nerva primarily Pannonian triumph, which instantly, as the new era opened, served to mark the return of victory under it to the Roman banners. I say not to rest on this, who knows not of the triumphs under Trajan, the Roman Alexander, by which Dacia, Armenia, Mesopotamia, and other provinces were, in the course of the first 20 years of the period I speak of, added to the Roman Empire. As regards the 43 years which followed, constituting the reigns of Hadrian and Antoninus Pius, though they were years for the most part of honorable and glorious peace, yet there was passing wars in each reign sufficient to illustrate the continued fulfillment of the predicted testimony that they should conquer. First, the Jewish war under Hadrian, confined to a single province, in which the rebellion of that unhappy people was put down with fearful slaughter. Then under Antoninus Pius, the lesser wars on the frontiers, just before alluded to, which served not only to exercise the Roman legions, as Gibbon expresses it, but also to deepen the impression on the minds of the barbarians everywhere of the invincibility of the Roman Empire. After this, however, towards the conclusion of the octogenarian period that I speak of, wars arose again, and of so formidable a character as to test to the very uttermost the truth of the prophecy. From east and west, north and south, it seemed as if the whole barbarian world had been stirred from its very foundations to overwhelm the envied glory and prosperity of the empire. And on the sudden surprise, once and again, and a third time, alike on the Euphrates and the Danube frontier, the Roman frontier army was overthrown. But so soon as the imperial strength had gathered itself up against the invaders, not only was the invasion on either side, and in every case repelled, but the war earned triumphantly into the invader's own territory. The Parthian War was successfully ended by the total overthrow of that people, the capture of the chief Armenian and Parthian cities, Artaxata, Seleucia, Ctesiphon, and a readdition to the empire of the great Mesopotamian province, which, originally conquered by Trajan, had, from motives of policy, been voluntarily ceded by Hadrian. And even in the most mighty of all those wars, the Marcomannic, victory after victory still attended the Roman standards under the second Antonini, till the German barbarians, driven into their forests, were reduced to submission, so that the destiny assigned to the white horse's rider, and to conquer, continued to be realized by the Romans, even to the end of the period under review. And as the magnificent column of Trajan still remains at Rome, the just memorial of the triumphs of its commencement, so it has been ordered that there should remain also that of Antoninus Aurelius, the magnificent, although inferior monument of those of its close. Roman numeral II. The empire's triumphs and prosperity during the subject era. What was the influential agency that would cause these? In other words, who the agents personified by the writer, that which is related of the reigning emperors throughout this era, their absolute authority, for under them, says Gibbon, the Roman Empire was governed by absolute power under the guidance of virtue and wisdom, the armies being restrained by the firm and gentle hand of 4 successive emperors, and their power used only to cherish the nation's happiness, advance its prosperity, or guide it to its triumphs, must at once have suggested them as the persons symbolized. As Gibbon continues, the delight was theirs of beholding the general happiness of which they were the authors, nor were the visible symbols wanting in the vision to foreshow the same to the evangelist. First, the rider's white horse might suggest it, white having been both, in earlier times, the chosen color for horses used by Roman generals in their triumphs, and still by Roman emperors. Then the crown given him would seem sufficient absolutely to confirm this impression, the triumph and triumphal crown wearing having been from time to time of Augustus all but withdrawn, as too great an honor from subordinate generals, and from Domitian's accession appropriated as his own proper distinctive to the reigning emperor. It so happens, indeed, that as regards this very point, an objection has been made to the effect that the diadem, not the crown, would have been the badge represented if Roman emperors had been symbolized, and that, in fact, instead of the presentation of the crown fixing the meaning to the individuals in that high office, the want of the diadem positively precludes the idea of them being the persons meant. But the objection has been founded evidently on misapprehension. The respectable writer objecting seems to have confounded either between the kingly and imperial offices, or between the practices of the earlier and later Roman emperors. Let me explain. By the emperor up to the time of Augustus was meant, as is well known, simply the victorious Roman general, saluted with that title by his soldiers on the field of battle, and with the triumph and its coveted honors and insignia following. Now, though with Augustus and his successors the most absolute monarchical power attached to their emperorship, yet it was their policy to veil it under the old military or imperial badges. Hence their public insignia, of which the mock robing and crowning of Jesus by the Roman soldiery is an affecting remembrance, were still the laurel crown and purple robe. The assumption of the diadem, or broad white fillet set with pearls, viewed as it was by the Romans as a badge of oriental despotism and of the servitude of the subject vassals, these emperors carefully shunned. The remembrance long remained with them of the feelings exhibited by the Roman people on its being offered by Antony to their great ancestor Julius Caesar, insomuch that it was considered an act of madness on the part of Caligula to attempt to assume it. Abundant memorials exist to show that, all through the time to which our first seal refers, the crown remained the badge of Roman emperors, the diadem of barbarous kings. In fact, not until about the time of Diocletian, near 200 years after St. John's banishment to Patmos, was the diadem adopted by Roman emperors, the innovation being accompanied with the other insignia attendant on Eastern royalty, the personal act of adoration not excepted. The change constituted an epoch in Roman history, and one markedly noticed, as will hereafter appear in the Apocalypse. Thus, then, about Diocletian's time, and thenceforward, but not until then, the diadem was the imperial badge, for a century or more, conjointly with the laurel, then, I believe, exclusively. So that, whereas, with reference to such a period as the close of the 4th century, it would have been an impropriety, and with reference to the 6th, an anachronism, to represent the laurel crown as a badge of empire on an imperial or royal head. Just as much, and indeed still more, it would have been an anachronism to represent a Roman emperor of the first 2.5 centuries with a diadem. Thus, the objection has only led us to see the more clearly the exact chronological propriety, as well as the personal distinctiveness of this particular emblem in the first seal's hieroglyphic. And I cannot but add that the very going forth of the apocalyptic writer and presentation of the crown to him were yet additional points of resemblance in the syndicalism picture to the imperial usages at Rome in the time of St. John. For an emperor's going forth to war was an occasion perpetually taken by the Senate to express their good wishes and their predictions of success, often in those cases falsified. And in token thereof, medals were struck, depicting the emperor galloping forth on horseback, striking down an enemy, and with the legend, Profectio or Expedito Augusti. Further, supposing that success had already begun to favor him in the war, they had a mode of expressing the successes accomplished, as well as those that might be anticipated for the future. He was pictured, it might be, with a captive enemy prostrate at his horse's feet, or else perhaps, whether on a triumphal arch or on terra firma, as going forth between trophies and captives, and with victory in either case crowning, or with crown in hand preceding him. Such is the device on a medal of the Emperor Claudius, with the exurg De Britannis underneath in memorial of his conquest of Britain. Such, more fully, that on another, which depicts a triumphal arch erected to that emperor's father, Claudius Drusus, after victories over the Germans, of which latter an engraved is appended. And I think that after viewing it, and considering what has been also further observed respecting the crown and the white horse, the reader will deem me justified in expressing the like persuasion in the introduction to this chapter, to the effect that a person conversant, like St. John, with the Roman usages of the age, could scarcely but have had suggested to his mind, a priori, by these emblems of the first seal, the idea of a Roman emperor speeding forth to victory. It is observable that medallic memorials still remain of the 5 several emperors in question, depicting them, more or less fully, under guise of these self-same semi-apocalyptic devices, the 2 chief conquerors, Trajan and M. Aurelius, riding forth as in the Profectio Augusti, and all the 5 either crowned or with the crown held out to them by victory. And in their cases, we know, the medals spoke truth, not as in some other cases, mere false flattery. One objection, however, may still present itself. One difficulty seemed to stand in the way of this our imperial application of the prophetic symbol. I mean the fact that of the rider having a bow in his hand, for the weapon represented in the hands of Roman emperors on medals and other extant monuments of antiquity is generally the javelin, sometimes the sword, never, so far as I know, the bow, and hence indeed the tringa. Though not unconscious of the general fitness of the emblem of a crowned rider on a white horse going forth conquering and to conquer, to depict the era of prosperity and triumph under the 5 Roman emperors whose reigns followed next after the date of the apocalyptic visions, yet argues that the bow was an Asiatic and barbarian weapon and badge, and purposely inserted into the hieroglyphic to divert the thoughts of the observer from the Roman Empire and emperors, in which view he has been followed by other commentators. But is this correct? Was the bow a badge of Asiatic and other barbarians only? Was there not one particular province and people among the provincials of the Roman Empire of whom it was also distinctive? Distinctive not equally alone, but even almost more than of any barbarian people whatsoever. If the reader will consult the records of antiquity, he will find that such was indeed the case with the island and islanders of Crete. Alike, their colonial origin, mythological traditional legends, military history, and manufacture attest this peculiar connection to the Cretans and the bow. As to their origin, it appears from ancient authors that Crete was originally peopled, in part at least, from that part of Palestine situated on the Mediterranean coast, which was by the Arabs called Caritha, and by the Syrians Creth, its inhabitants bearing the similar Hebraic appellation Crethim, as the 70 have translated it, respecting which Crethim, Bocart adds that they were noted archers, some of them deployed by David as his life guard. It is Sir Isaac Newton's supposition that Crete was thus peopled from Palestine about 1045 B.C., when many of the Phoenicians and Syrians fled from King David into Asia Minor, Crete, Greece, and Libya. Others date the migration earlier, but whatever the epoch, this is certain, that in Crete itself the archery habits of the Syrian Crethim colonists, as well as their name, remained. The earliest traditional legends of the Cretan islanders ascribe a similar preeminence in the art to those of their forefathers that were in the island native born. It is told to us by Diodorus Siculus that Apollo, the Cretan Apollo, was affirmed in these legends to have been the first inventor of the bow, and how he taught the natives archery, whence their superior skill in the art before and above all men. Memorial Cretan medals, of which traditions are still extant, struck in the Roman imperial times, some bearing the device of Apollo and his bow, some of Diana and her bow, with the inscription, Community of Crete. Descending from the times of legendary fable to those of real history, we find the connection of the bow and the Cretan islanders constantly marked thenceforward for ages. In the military annals of the neighboring states, among Homer's heroes, it was the Cretan Murion that bore away the palm in archery. By Pindar, the appellation bowman was attached as a distinctive appellation to the Cretan islanders. And Pausanias states that in those earlier historic times the Cretans alone of all the Greeks were archers, impugning the correctness of a piece of sculpture which represented Diotrephes as pierced by arrows, his slayers being other Greeks, not Cretans. With reference to later times, Thucydides relates how in the Peloponnesian War archers were fetched by the belligerent parties from Crete. As regards those of Macedonian supremacy, we are reminded of the same fact by Plutarch, and with reference to those of Roman greatness, from the Carthaginian wars down to those of Caesar, when Crete had been made a Roman province, and afterwards, as late even as the reign of Claudius Gothicus in the 3rd century, by Polybius, Livy, Lucan, Hirtius, and Trebellius Pollio. It was suggested by astronomers, in explanation of the fact of their long-continued eminence in the art, that Crete lay under the zodiac sign of the archer, Sagittarius. Moreover, the Cretan manufacture of bows and arrows was celebrated. No European bow was noted like theirs. The name Cretan, in fact, came to be attached as an appellative to bows, and it was a natural device impressed on their medals. I append one as a specimen, and subjoined the observations on the device as a Cretan distinctive of a Roman poet and German medalist. Under all which circumstances can I be wrong in stating that the bow was preeminently a Cretan weapon and badge, or in inferring that, when a bow was pictured emblematically before St. John in a European warrior's hands, the intention would be to signify that the warrior was of Cretan origin? In fact, it happens that, over and above all the other accumulated evidence just adduced, we have extant a Greek epigram or epitaph consisting of a set of emblems, including an express explanation to this effect. A magpie sculptured on the tombstone was to mark the loquacity of the person whose epitaph it was. The cup, her proneness to drink. The wool, her diligence in work. The bow, what did the bow mark? It is explained that this was to signify that she was a Cretan. I must confess that, considering the important bearing of this point on the commencement, and consequently on the whole scheme of apocalyptic interpretation, it has seemed to me a matter for thankfulness that so illustrative an epigram should have been preserved to us. But what is the application of all this, you may be thinking, to the point in hand? Or how does what we have inferred attach to the emblem of a bow to connect itself with the symbol of the first seal and its imperial horsemen riding on to triumph? I now proceed to explain. Down to the accession of Otho, the reigning Caesars, from Julius to Galba inclusive, were of old Roman families. Agreeably with the Roman jus imaginum, they exhibited in their halls the busts of a long line of Roman nobles, their ancestors, whether of the Julian gens, the Claudian, or the Sulpician. And as for Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian, and Vespasian's two sons, Titus and Domitian, if not all of Roman, yet they were of Italian extraction, and indeed Otho of an Italian family still more ancient and noble than all the rest, for he was descended from the Etruscan kings. But after Domitian, there was a notable change on this head in the character of the imperial succession. It is said to have been pre-intimated in a dream a little before his death. To Domitian, he dreamed, says Suetonius, that a neck of gold appeared to grow branching off from his own neck, behind, that which so branched off implying a new line of emperors, and the gold, their character as introducers of a golden age. Another historian, Aurelius Victor, expressly sets forth the novel character of this line as a fact very remarkable in respect of its being one of princes of foreign extraction. Quote, "Hitherto men of Roman or Italian origin ruled the empire. From after this time foreigners in extraction," in which statement he is followed, indeed copied, by the younger Victor. And they both note at the same time the increased happiness that accrued to the empire from the innovation. And what then was the foreign country or province to which the 5 emperors might be ascribed, as to lineage and family, that followed next after Domitian, and introduced and kept up this golden age of the empire? Prior to which question, another must indeed first be answered. Can they all be classified together under one and the same head and family? The answer to which the latter question is, that they may be so classified together, because, in a manner quite unparalleled in the subsequent history of the Roman emperors, they were all connected, as in the line of one and the same family, by successive adoptions. Trajan was adopted by Nerva, Hadrian by Trajan, Antoninus by Hadrian, Aurelius by Antoninus, each as their medals and their extant memorials of antiquity illustrate to us, taking the name of his predecessor in virtue of the adoption. Thus, according to the well-defined Roman law of adoption, all were reckoned as of Nerva's family, he being the head of the line. And what was Nerva's own national origin and extraction? In Dion Cassius we find what is evidently an allusion to him, as an Italiot, which word will be, by a reader versed in Greek language, be well understood to mean a colonist of Greek extraction, settled in Italy. His exact Greek provincial origin, however, he does not mention, but Aurelius Victor supplies the omission. He tells us, and most of our best-known modern historians of the earlier emperors of Rome repeat the statement, that Nerva was, in respect of family extraction, a Cretan. So, yes, the meaning of the bow in the writer's hand is now indeed manifest, and how admirable, beyond what the most learned of human artists or scholars would have devised, appears the point in the comprehensiveness of this device of the divine spirit. Had a javelin or a sword been in the hand of the writer, so as Vitringa would have had it, in case of his representing Roman emperors, the weapon carried would have added precisely nothing, either to the meaning or the distinctness of the hieroglyphic, the crown sufficing to designate emperors, and the javelin and the sword, although appropriate, not being distinctive of them. But by the addition of the bow held in the hand, observe, before the crown was given him, there was prefigured the very province of the family to which the empire within a year from after the visions in Patmos was destined to be committed, and under which, in a measure quite unprecedented, the symbolic horse was to assume and to retain the white color, the Roman nation to flourish in prosperity, and in its wars, both at first and whenever afterwards occurring, to realize the predicted destiny of conquering and to conquer.